Hi, this is Business is Personal. I'm Dr. Corrie Block. With me today on the episode, I'm really excited to have an amazing conversation with Mads Winther, who is one of the partners in Intenz Consultancy, and you guys specialize in B2B sales, leadership, and strategy. Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Tell me just a little bit about what your company does and the value that you add.
Yes. Actually, we're called Intenz because what we do is creating intensity. And the reason for that is we see that if you're number one or number two in any sport or in any industry, number one is normally only better because they're more intense.
Right.
They work harder, they're more focused, they're more dedicated. It's about performance.
That's right.
So that's why we call ourselves Intenz. But actually what we do is we work with, when you talk about strategy, we talk about to work intensely with your strategy, you have to put it into the culture.
Yes.
To put it into the culture, you need leadership, leadership skills and attitude. And then, of course, the nerve in any company is selling.
Yeah, that's right.
Otherwise, you don't need to be
Absolutely. I told this to my clients just in a training program about a week ago. I was like, look, sales is the front line. All of the money that pays for all of your salaries, the lights, all of the food on all of your plates, it all comes in through the sales line. Like if you're not taking care of your salespeople, where is any of your income coming from, right? So you have to be pushing really hard to develop that sales staff.
Yeah, and especially today, because what I feel is that we used to talk about sales is a department.
Yeah.
For me, it's not a department, it's a function. It's a function in a company, and we have to understand that sales is not the whole entire company, but the entire company has to be sales.
That's right. No, I totally agree with you. And especially when we concentrate on B2B sales.
Exactly.
I tell my clients that the sales cycle in the Middle East is 1,000 cups of tea. And so B2B sales tends to be a much longer game than B2C sales. What are you finding are the big leverage points for successful B2B sales?
Yeah, I think actually if I could focus on three major issues. First of them is that we have to turn sales 180 degrees.
Okay.
By that I mean, if you're walking as a person into the mall, you want to buy. Right. You don't want somebody to sell to you.
Right.
And that comes from the old souk as well. It comes that you're selling. In B2B, we have to learn people are buying. You don't need to sell that much, get them to buy. That is the first part. You need to understand the customer journey.
Right.
You need to understand what they're doing. Secondly, you need to have an efficient sales process aligned with the journey. Right. That means you need to understand the journey of the customers and then align your sales process. And then the third one, constantly development on your sales competences.
Right.
I see so many salespeople, 20 years in business, selling exactly the same way as they did 20 years ago.
Oh, and you can't do that now because people aren't transactional anymore.
No,
They're much more relational.
Much more.
Especially with like the influences we have on the planet with distractions all the time and fake news and you know all the scandals. It's harder to know who to trust and it's harder to know who to build relationship with. And so I find a lot of the B2B sales skills are soft skills.
Yeah.
Am I right?
No, I'm totally right, but I think I'm right with you that it's soft skills. And on the other hand, you have to choose. You can actually, 5 years ago, I was introduced to a lady who's doing a PhD in sales.
Yeah.
And she said to me, Mads, is selling just selling? And then I thought, what do you mean? And then she asked me another question, is running just running? And then I said, no, because a 100-meter run, 10-kilometer marathon is not the same.
That's right.
And then she said, no. Selling is not just selling. You can be very transactional, as you said before. Right. Transactional, you need to be very online, digital, focused on doing that mass transaction.
That's right.
Less people. But you need to be fast and convenient.
Right.
And then on the other part, as you're mentioning, I totally agree with you. In most B2B selling, you need to be much more relationship-oriented, but definitely also understanding the business of the customer.
Right.
What can you do for them
right.
instead of what you're selling to them?
Right. So there's a big caution in B2B sales because we have a long sales cycle and it's difficult to build trust and we need to build that relationship. All of those sales relationships are agenda-driven.
Yes.
And we as humans, we tend to buck against the idea of an agenda-driven relationship. But my argument aren't all relationships a little bit agenda-driven?
Of course they are, because in my opinion, everybody has, behind what we are doing to create a relationship, we have an ego.
Yes.
And that ego wants to reach something.
Yeah.
Whatever you're a good friend or whatever you're a family or whatever you're in business, you have an ego that wants to achieve something.
Right.
If it doesn't do that, then it's not satisfied.
Right.
So of course it's agenda driven because you have an agenda.
Right.
But you can learn to understand if we speak about empathy and understanding, you can have to learn to understand what they're doing, those people that you want to work with as customers. Then, of course, you can do it with an agenda of what you want to do, but also with an agenda of understanding them.
That's right. So I liken that to the metaphor of marriage.
Yes.
Right? Dating is the really exciting part, and that's the front line of sales. When you have an agenda, right? When you're dating, you have an agenda. You want to find a partner. Okay, and your partner might last for 3 months, 3 years, 30 years, who knows, okay? But you're looking for a partner. If you weren't looking for somebody, then you wouldn't be dating. So that's the sexy part. It's the fun part.
Yes.
And then eventually, if you end up in a long-term committed relationship, there's no such thing as a long-term committed relationship without the long-term and the committed.
Yes.
And that takes work. And that's a totally different nature of relationship.
Of course it is.
When you pivot from that initial, hey, we both got an agenda, and now we find out our agendas meet, to now we have to deliver for each other.
I think that's one of the changes that has been, because we see the changes of selling came with the fourth industrial revolution, that is the digitalization. That changed totally the way we were used to selling. Because normally there was a big kind of trust between the salespeople and the organization that bought the product. But today, as a buyer, it's so easy to get new information and new products, new services, because you just Google it. So the relationship has changed. And if the relationship, that's the same with marriage. If the relationship is no more valuable, you change it. Value here can be a lot of things, but you change it because you also, with Tinder and all these dating apps, you propose for a lot of options. And that's the same with the customers. So I like your metaphor? I like it because it's very much like a marriage. And if there's no value, you look for other opportunities. And that's the same in selling. Right. So selling is not then a transaction like you said in the beginning, but it's the beginning of a relationship that pivots from something that's cool and fun and agenda-driven and sexy to something that really needs regular maintenance in order to maintain the trust and transparency that's required in order to have that as a mutually fruitful relationship. But between, it's never just a buyer, right? And it's never just a seller. There's a seller who is representing a whole community of people and a buyer who's representing a whole community of people. So they have to balance all of those interests as well. So the seller can't do something that's good for them and not good for their community. And the buyer can't do something that's good for them and not good for their community. So in the negotiations, it's not just one single relationship of two representatives, but it's one representative actually with all of these maybe 1,000 or 10,000 voices behind them, negotiating with another representative that has another 1,000 or 10,000 voices behind them. And that makes the game much more complex. What you mentioned here is very interesting. First, if we go to the part of the buyer, we've seen a raise in number of people engaged or involved in buying. Actually, right now, we don't know the exact, but in average, nearly 7 people are involved in buying a B2B product. That does not surprise me. No, and it could actually be 7 departments, meaning it could be 70 people. But that is so easy because if somebody wants to buy a new machine, they probably ask a younger guy to Google what's possible to buy. So he's involved now, and he will ask his peers what they're doing. So on the buyer side, a lot of people involved. On the seller side, it's also very interesting what we see. You're doing a shift. Normally, selling used to be a one-man's band, going out, meeting somebody, came home, being celebrated as the big hero. I had the order. Today, it's a team game. That means very often you see the best B2B salespeople, and that is actually going out to you B2B guys. They bring in a team. That means that the sales guy bring in a technician because he's much more trustworthy. They bring in a serviceman. They bring in somebody else because it's actually raised the credibility. And that's a change because in old days, the sales guy was the big hero. That's right. And I'm totally with you, actually, because we find, look, it's the same as it is in leadership. There's nobody that's omni-talented, right? There's no omniscient, omni-talented leaders out there. So if you recognize that on a buying team or a selling team in B2B, and you build a good balanced team, and the team makes the buy, right? Rather than just a purchaser. And then the team makes the sell, rather than just one sales rep. I think that's a much stronger foundation for a long-lasting relationship. It's easier to build a strong relationship with more contacts and more people speaking to each other. And then, of course, as a salesperson, I talked about the sales process. The first one is understanding, of course, this journey. What do the buyers do when they want to buy? Then the second part is understanding your own process. Because what I just trained a group of salespeople from a huge Swedish company selling ice cream manufacturing machines. We talked about the process. And the end of the process was always meeting the purchaser.
Yeah.
And the salespeople hated it.
Yes.
So then I asked them, where would you like the purchaser to be? And they said, but he is in the end.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, but where would you like him to be? And then they said, in the beginning. Okay, then let's change your process. Because we could ask how to get him engaged in the beginning. And what we actually did, we invented some questions, how they could actually meet the team from the client earlier. So they met now the purchaser in the beginning. And when you try to imagine that you're the purchaser, and I'm meeting you for the first time, and your agenda is to get a lower price.
Yes.
You kill me for getting a lower.
Especially since all of the other negotiations it's already happened.
Exactly.
Right?
And you're not engaged.
No, it's true. And then the purchaser has that horrible, like, I'm representing my team and my team already wants this, but I haven't done my job yet.
No, he has now to, his agenda is to do his job, lower price.
Yes, but then you end up with the purchaser poised against their own team.
Yes, and he's killing the partner.
Yes, it kills the organization and the negotiation.
So what we actually did here, we learned the salespeople to make the buyer understanding. Let's get the entire team together to build a vision for the project.
That's great.
So the purchaser was engaged in the beginning.
Yeah, that's really good.
Will he still look for discount? Of course he will, but in a different way.
Yeah, but that's their voice at the table, right?
Yes.
That's their job. You know, somebody else's job is to make sure it's technically sound, one to make sure it's a good culture fit, and then the purchaser's job is to make sure that the number works.
Yes.
That's it.
And when you talked about these cups of coffee,
Yes.
I can tell you that 73% of salespeople's activities in B2B selling are not aligned with where the buyer is in the circle of buying. That means nearly 3 out of 4 meetings are a waste of time.
That's a big inefficiency.
Totally.
So how do you fix it?
You fix it the way that you have. This is the big part, because first of all, you need really to find out, do people want to change?
Right.
If they don't want to change, it's a bigger problem, because then you don't have the real feeling of we want to change.
Right.
But secondly, you need to give them a perspective of understanding they can be much more successful by doing differently. Because you can show them that people buy differently, so you need to sell differently.
Right.
And then you start on investigating the customer journey, you understand the process, and then you align it to the journey, and then in old days, we practice a lot. You need to know the product, the specification, and the benefit.
Right.
Today, forget it.
Right.
Because the buyer already knows that.
Right.
You need to be much more clever in understanding the process and what your product can do for the business of the buyer. So it's a totally change. And that change needs to come not in a one-day course. It comes over time.
That's right.
That's one of the things. I've been in this business for more than 25 years. In the beginning, I did sales courses. 28 people in one room, 3 days, got a lot of theory. And when they went home, they were totally a disaster for them, because everything in their head was, I can do nothing. So they just kept on doing what they used to do. Today, much more small impacts, small changes, many impacts, because that's the way we change them.
I agree with you. I've always said that selling is 80% listening and 20% talking.
It is.
Right? And it's maybe even more than that, actually. Yeah, but the more time you spend at the beginning of the sales cycle just listening to your buyer, and not to the purchaser, but to the purchaser's community, right? That's the difference that we're making here, is that you're not selling to a person, you're selling to a person who's part of a team, and that team is representing an entire community. So as much as your buyer is much more, holistically cultural, you need to pay much more attention to that team of people.
And actually, we see a change now also when people recruit salespeople, because looking back, if you look into personality and profiles of people, you'll normally look for an extrovert, dynamic person. Right. Today, you actually see a change that people you're looking for in sales is not introvert, but less extrovert.
Ambivert.
And less dynamic.
Yes. Because
they need to be much more interested in other people than themselves.
That's right.
And they need to be more understanding of some structures.
Oh, I love that. That's really great. Actually, I've not read any great research that props that up, but I totally agree with you. So look, if you're hiring for B2B sales, maybe dial back on the extravagance of the characters that you're hiring, because I know that in the past you were looking for an all-star. Now we're not looking for an all-star talker, we're looking for an all-star listener. So find somebody with that empathy, that emotional intelligence, that's going to spend the hours and hours, the 80%, with just their ears open and their pen down.
Definitely, I would totally agree with you.
That's exactly the way that we should.
That is the way we should do it. And then I had a very interesting one of my clients. They hired a top salesperson from another company.
Yeah.
But they forgot to understand what kind of selling he was doing, because he was selling a very famous brand.
Right.
And when he came into this company, there was no help from the brand because it was a brand new product.
Oh no.
And he was used not to sell, but to take orders.
Right.
And he couldn't sell the same way, even that his track record shows he did amazing results. So he had to do research, understanding what was the environment he was playing in. A football coach will always look for a special kind of football player.
Right.
He will not just take somebody who shoots goals if he doesn't fit in the system. That's the same in selling.
No, it's true. And I totally agree with you. I think selling is now more of a football game than a basketball game.
Yes.
Right? Where in basketball, an owner will spend all of the money on their all-star player because one person with enough height can take 3 or 4 steps and cross the entire court and dunk it, right? So then the rest of the players, they just need to get the ball to the all-star. Exactly. They can cross the court and dunk, but that can't happen in football. No. In football, it takes an average of 6 passes.
It does.
To cross the field to get at least a chance at a goal, right? So your all-star runners are only going to be the striker. Yes. But there's going to be 5 other players on that field. Yes. And sales, B2B sales specifically, has to take that approach now, where we're looking at teams of sellers working with teams of buyers in order to make much better culture fits of products and services.
And like sport, you see, sport is becoming a data-driven sport. Yeah. They understand a lot about the data. That's the same in selling. Yeah. Because in old days, if somebody did well, we just thought we could copy them. But we didn't actually really know what they were doing. Right. Today, we have to be focused much more on data, on behavior, than data on results. Right. Because result can be luck or unluck. That's right. Behavior, we need to schedule how we want actually to do the sales. Exactly. And that calls for change in sales leadership.
Which 3 behaviors would you track if you were tracking the behaviors of your sales team?
First of all, I will definitely track, are these people engaged in doing things? Are they driven by themselves to get started? Right. You cannot have a salesperson that's not self-driven, self-motivated. That's the first one. The second part is definitely, is this person more interested in himself or the other guy? Because he must be more interested in the other person than himself. Right. So the understanding of emotional intelligence, understanding I'm curious about you, that's very important. And the third one is basically, how are the communication skills? Because communication is not only telling, it's also asking questions. Absolutely. And it's definitely listening and it's observing. So these skills are basically fundamental and you must look for them.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with you. And I think top among them is emotional intelligence. Yes. Look, it's a million-year-old game, right? Sales is a million-year-old game. We should use the tools that we as humans have been developing over the last million years to build trust and transparency with each other. And I think, like you said, people who are better listeners than talkers, that might be a new shift in terms of team-based sales. But it's still based on the same empathy rules and the same emotional intelligence rules as we've been building relationships for 10,000 generations, you know? So rather than relying on the new tips and tricks, let's rely on the very old best practices and go back to what makes us human, you know? Trust.
The only thing that has, because that is the basic fundamentals, and we forgot them in selling because we tried to impress people instead of inspire them. Right. And I want salespeople to inspire, not to impress, because impress we can do in marketing. But in selling, we need to inspire. And then I think it calls for big change in leadership. Right. Definitely, because you cannot just... I see a lot of people just still measuring the salespeople from how many calls they're doing, how many meetings. And if you want many more calls and many meetings, you get them, but without quality.
Exactly right. So I think it's time spent listening rather than talking. I think that's a really great metric. And if we admit that all of our relationships are agenda driven, from dating and having kids. Having kids is also very selfish. You know, you don't have kids because you want more humans on the planet. You have kids because you want kids, right? All of our relationships humanly are agenda driven. If we take that approach and say, look, our agenda for B2B sales is now going to be primarily curiosity, and secondly, solution. That's it. If we're curiosity and solution oriented, we're going to spend a lot more time listening, and we're going to have a much bigger team doing it. I love that thought. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you.
This has been a really, really quick conversation, but really amazing. And I think we've got some great tips and tricks for our listeners. So thank you so much, Mads, for being with me today. I really appreciate all of your input. And for those of you out there who want tips and tricks on B2B you can get in touch with me, get in touch with Mads, and we'll be sure to help you out.